Hello and welcome to episode 157 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, Burger King reveals plans for a 100% electric vehicle fleet by 2030. Wait, Burger King has vehicles? Why? I didn't know that.
Japan is getting in on the EV tax credits in the U.S. by signing a new free trade agreement. This new deal will allow Japanese automakers to receive some of the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. Now all they have to do in Japan is actually make some EVs.
Ooh, a 1981 Chevrolet Impala was converted to hydrogen fuel way back in 1982. I don't have a joke for this one, Brian. You know where it was made? Right here where we live in our obscure city.
That's amazing. Well, I think it's one of those setup and a punchline all in one line, so I think you're covered.
Okay, thank you. Thank goodness.
The 2035 EU ban on combustion vehicles is finally going ahead. Germany wanted an exception for carbon-neutral fuels. So as long as your combustion car has a tree growing out of the roof, you'll be fine.
All that and more on this week's edition of the Clean Energy Show. You know, I could have made a joke about the Impala being just improved, an already perfect car improved, sarcastically, because it was one of the worst cars ever made. Let's face it. It's no Pinto, but it's bad.
Not a great era for American automobiles.
Well, you're back and in one piece, sir, from your trip to the United States of America. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, I want to just start with a quick recap of the Fargo Film Festival. It was a ton of fun. I was there for 5 days. We drove there in a gas car because time was of the essence, so we weren't able to drive electric, but we were racing a blizzard to get there. I don't know if you got much snow here, but...
None.
Yeah, down in Fargo, we knew there was a blizzard coming at about 3 p.m., so we had to make it there by 3 p.m., which is tough because it's like a 9-10 hour drive, and we just barely made it. Like about 20 minutes after we got there, a blizzard set in, and it was a pretty big one. There was a ton of snow. But we stayed in a new hotel they've got in downtown Fargo, North Dakota, called the Jasper Hotel. Super cool, super funky hotel. It was the place to be in Fargo. Kevin O'Leary was staying at our hotel. Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank.
Why? To avoid criminal prosecution for the boating accident in Canada a couple years ago?
I think he's on some kind of a media tour to explain why he lost $18 million on FTX. Apparently, he manages some money fund in North Dakota, a North Dakota money fund. So he was probably there to, explain himself to those people. I don't think he lost the money of the people in North Dakota.
Well, I had to go on a media tour when I lost $80 at a casino.
So he wasn't there for the film festival, but it was the place to be in Fargo, the Jasper Hotel. It was super cool. So very, very quickly, a few highlights from the Fargo Film Festival. There was
Kevin O'Leary is an international celebrity.
Yeah.
And he's there in Fargo, North Dakota. Great city, but small.
Yes.
Not really relevant in the national scene except for the Fargo Film Festival, which he was not there for.
No,
he was just passing through town.
Yeah.
So that is so weird.
Yeah, well, there was an interview with him in the newspaper and then apparently on a podcast. Their newspaper there is called The Forum, and they actually do a lot of podcasts, their newspaper. So one of the panels at the film festival was about true crime, and there were 2 Fargo people who do true crime podcasts based out of this newspaper in Fargo. And whatever reason, their newspaper does a lot of podcasts. It was quite interesting to me.
And I could just hear him on that podcast saying, I saw Brian Stockton from the Clean Energy Show. I mean, what's he doing in town?
Yeah, exactly. No doubt. But anyway, festival highlights very quickly. Jess Zilla, which was a featured doc about Jessalyn Silva, who was a young female boxer trying to make it to the Olympics. That was amazing.
Can I just hold you there for a second?
Yes.
Brian's Movie Corner.
Yes.
There we go. We have to put that in.
Now we can proceed. Now, yes. James, are you a fan of the A&W Whistle Dog?
Brian, I'm the biggest fan of the A&W Whistle Dog. And you know what? I've got an anecdotal story for you when you're done.
Okay, there was a short documentary, about 15 minutes. It was a Canadian documentary.
Are you kidding me? I would have traveled to Fargo just to see that. I didn't know that.
And the doc was called Bring Back the Whistle Dog. It was a very, very funny...
Why wasn't I in that? I should have been a central figure in that documentary.
Absolutely. But yes, they interviewed people exactly like you who are in love with the A&W Whistle Dog and about how their lives have just been a mess ever since they got rid of it. which was many years ago, I guess.
Yeah, it's been, to be honest, I mean, I, like most people, stopped eating them, but it's more like I remember it from my childhood. And then, you know what? They brought it back a couple of years ago. I was in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And all the ones where we live were sold out, you know, because they brought it back because they have a tie-in with Major League Baseball with the Toronto Blue Jays.
Yes.
Being a hot dog. I don't know why, but
yeah,
that's the only connection. It's very different than a ballpark, Frank. So, and you get there. They're all sold out here. We're at your cottage. Then we take off to Winnipeg for a day. I find one that has one, because we're waiting for my wife to shop somewhere, I think at Mountain Equipment Co-op or something. Best hot dog I ever ate. Like it was gourmet. It was like from an expensive restaurant, you know, a good restaurant that would make a hot dog. There's not that many. You don't get into the 5-star level to make hot dogs, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Very good hot dog.
This is basically what the documentary was, interviewing people like you who
they toast the bun now, Brian. They never used to do that. It's some serious gourmet stuff now.
Well, and they set it up so that like halfway through the documentary, the whistle dog comes back and they're able to show these people that they've interviewed. And they literally bring in
that should be a feature. That should be an Academy Award nominated feature to go up against Navalny. And all the breeze.
I checked. It doesn't seem to be available online anywhere yet. It's just, I assume, doing the festival circuit here. But hopefully, eventually, it was very funny. I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah,
I bet you did. I bet you did.
They involved the guy from the TV commercials. Like there's these radio hosts in Edmonton who were big fans of the whistle dog, and the guy from the TV commercials comes in with whistle dogs for them after they'd been complaining about there being no whistle dogs. It was very funny.
Oh my goodness. Really?
Yeah.
Was the filmmaker there?
No, unfortunately.
Oh, unfortunately. No. Oh, that's too bad. I would have had questions if I was there.
Yeah. Okay. Feature doc called The Thief Collector. This one's going to be on Amazon Prime in a few months.
I got to interrupt you. I have to have my anecdotal whistle dog story. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Sure.
I've got two. One, I used to try and replicate it at home. Okay.
Yeah.
And two, and I did a pretty good job. You can ask some of our mutual friends. They'll tell you. When I was planning my trip to the next city, Saskatoon, in my new Bolt in the semi-winter time, it's cold. We're having a cold spring, very cold. Stupidly cold. There's 2 level 2 chargers along the way. One's in a town of Davidson at a Napa Auto Parts store, and a second one is in a town called Dundurn, and it's at a biker bar. So I looked at the menu of the biker bar to think, well, if I spend an hour there, would I go inside the biker bar and have some grub? Sure. And A, it's all very expensive, but B, they've got a rip-off whistle dog. They literally call it the rip-off whistle dog. And it's $18, which is, the whistle dog was getting pretty pricey in its heyday, and his last days too when it came back. But $18 is crazy. I don't know if you get anything with that, but I would have, I would have wanted to have one. Thirdly, we don't go there very often, but if we go to Five Guys Burgers and Fries, I will sometimes order the hot dog with bacon. And relish the same condiments that are on the A&W whistle dog. They cut it in half, people. They used to deep fry the hot dog. They used to cut it in half and deep fry it. Because my best friend as a little kid, his mom was a cook at A&W when we were like 5, 6, 7 years old. And I remember that fact. And then that A&W burnt down.
Okay, you should have been in this documentary because
you're damn straight. I should have been.
That was not in it.
He couldn't find me, but I'm here now.
Okay, so as a feature documentary called The Thief Collector, if you're interested in art heist films, this was a really clever and fun documentary about this famous painting by William de Kooning called Woman Ochre, and it was stolen back in the 80s. Out of a small gallery. At the time, it was worth about $300,000. But in the intervening 30, 40 years, this painting is now worth $160 million.
Whoa.
And they found it hanging on the wall of somebody's house.
You're kidding. Like somebody just thought it was a nice painting?
Well, I don't want to spoil anything from the documentary, but...
were they the heist people?
They were possibly the heisters, yes.
But then you just keep the painting and not sell it? I mean, come on. Well, how do you sell it? I don't know. I'm not an art thief.
You've got to see the doc. It's possible they did other art heists. Those are maybe not proven, but it was super entertaining. It's going to be on Amazon Prime in a few months, called The Thief Collector. There's another art heist doc on Netflix that I saw, which was also equally good. So if you're interested in art heists, I think that would be great.
Okay, this is where I interject to tell the audience that we do get around to clean energy very soon.
Yes,
trust me.
I apologize. James took me on way too much of a tangent there with the whistle dog.
Oh, that's going to bring in viewers. Once I put that in the show notes, people are going to Google it and find it for decades to come, Brian. Yeah. Long after I'm dead.
Okay, there was a special screening of The Princess Bride, the 1987 film written by William Goldman.
Sure.
Very famous film. And the star of the film, Cary Elwes, who played the dashing young hero, he was at the screening and came out afterwards and told amazing, hilarious stories about the making of the film. Apparently, he's written a book about it, too, but it was super hilarious. Like, Andre the Giant is in that movie. And so just the stories about Andre the Giant are enough to keep you rolling in the aisles. So that was a lot of fun. But the highlight of the festival for me, do you watch horror films, James?
No.
Yeah,
I do watch them, but not very much. No, it's not my favorite genre.
No, I didn't think so. A few years ago, I started watching more horror films because it seemed like that's where a lot of the interesting filmmaking was kind of happening now.
I don't disagree with you, and I have seen a couple of interesting ones lately.
Mm-hmm. But the best director of these recent horror films was in Fargo, along with his wife, Kate Siegel, who is the star of most of these projects. So Mike Flanagan and Kate Siegel were special guests of the festival. And I'm just a huge, huge fan. This was amazing. I got to meet both of them. They were so cool. They had amazing stories. They had an evening at the festival where they told stories from the making of all their films. So Mike Flanagan's known mostly for stuff on Netflix like Midnight Mass and Haunting of Hill House. He's done several sort of one-off series on Netflix, and they're all great. But Midnight Mass and Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Bly Manor is another one. They're all fantastic. I'm a huge, huge fan.
All this and Kevin O'Leary in a remote, isolated place during a blizzard in North Dakota.
Right, in North Dakota. Absolutely. Mike Flanagan also did Dr. Sleep, which is a great film based on the Stephen King book. It's sort of a sequel to The Shining. So he talked about that. That was great to hear about because Dr. Sleep is a sequel to The Shining, and he managed to thread the needle between doing a sequel to the film, which Stephen King famously hates, and the book that it's based on, the Stephen King book. And he managed to somehow meld the two together and not piss off Stephen King.
Well, that's good.
Those stories were great. But yeah, Mike Flanagan, his first feature film called Absentia, premiered at the Fargo Film Festival back in 2011. So he has this connection to Fargo. Much like our connection, James and I made a feature film called The Sabbatical. And in 2016, we had the U.S. premiere at the Fargo Film Festival. And that was a huge thrill for me, one of the highlights of my career. And all this happened in Fargo. I want to thank Emily Beck, the director of the Fargo Theater. And we met a woman, Margie Bailey, who's one of the founders of the festival. She was great. And it just had an amazing time. It was the best.
Yeah, the great people who run a great festival. And, it's just that great old theater that is in really good condition with a packed house watching our film. Well, we spoke to Margie Bailey, and the first thing they did in 1999 was restore the theater because it was getting quite old. Yeah. So they had a huge restoration effort, and she was telling us about redoing the marquee, like they had to redo the marquee, one of those grand old marquees. And then once the theater was restored, then they started the festival, and it's been going for 23 years now. I was there in 2003 for the first time with a short film, so I've got a much longer history with the festival than most people. But it was amazing. And then the last thing I wanted to say about Fargo, so the blizzard set in, but the snow clearing in Fargo is so good, within 24 hours, you couldn't even tell there'd been a blizzard. Really? We're talking like a whole bunch of snow here, right? Like a pretty significant dump.
Yeah, and this was apparently like maybe the third most snow they've ever had in a winter in Fargo. Like
really?
This is a 50-year record for snow, but it I don't know. We complain about it on the show because the snow clearing around here is so bad that it makes it difficult for things like autonomous vehicles because there's just snow encroaching everywhere. You can't see the lines, but Fargo proves it can be done in a city that seems to get more snow than we do.
So if you're new to the show, I have a 2013 Nissan Leaf. The heater is not working in it. It's a question because it's 10 years old whether I should spend $4,000
Yeah.
It's only $1,100 in your car because I saw somebody had it done. I don't know how I came across that recently, Brian, but certainly more doable. And, because there's other things that can go in the car. The charger could go, the battery could go, who knows? Do I want to put $4,000 into it? Or I may come up with some interesting things to help. But anyway, we're 18 degrees Celsius below normal sometimes here, like really significantly below normal this spring. And it's really cold. So it was minus 23 when I woke up this morning. But the sun is so strong that it was melting, like turning the frost on the car into steam already, a black car. Yeah. And, it's just, so by the time I pick up my daughter, say in the afternoon, the air conditioning kicks in. Even at this temperature, because the sun is so strong. I mean, all hail the sun. Anyway, so I've got that old car, and then we just traded our Prius in, which sold this week. If you've been listening to the show, it sold for around $22,000, and normally I think we would have got 9 or 10 for it in pre-pandemic times with the same age and circumstances. Yeah. So a cab driver bought it, and it's going to be a cab now, which is kind of what I expected. So there's that. There's not a lot of those Priuses around here. So, the cab drivers all want them if possible, or any hybrid really, or maybe some of the Uber people as well. Anyway, so that's really good news for us because we made a few $1,000s. I think the dealerships were offering us under $15,000. So that's money in the bank, amazing. My friend, money in the bank. Anyway, so I'm in the driveway the other day because we have a new Chevy Bolt. That's my wife's car and the main car of our family now and our long-range vehicle. So the block heater cord was sitting there on the ground, and I thought, I don't need this anymore, and I will never need it again. Now, most of you don't know what a block heater cord is. I'll quickly explain it. Even most Canadians don't use them, but in really cold climates, gas cars have a little probe in them that heats up the oil at the bottom of the engine block so that it's not molasses when you try to turn it over in the morning, so that it's somewhat, liquidy instead of a solid when it's minus 40 degrees. Or minus 20, minus 17, minus 15 degrees, people plug in their cars to make sure they start. Anyway, we live in a very cold part of the plains here. And I'll never need it again. And I got verklempt, a little bit verklempt. It's like, wow, this is really significant. And, my wife will never pump gas again. She'll never get an oil change again. This is all behind us. It's not like we're going back to gas cars. And, it's interesting. The Prius had an inspection. I didn't mention this on the show, but it happened to get an inspection because my wife needed it for her work where she transports clients. They were at 50% pads after 6 years of a normal, So that means the brake pads would have lasted 12 years because of electrified vehicles, hybrids and electric vehicles use regenerative braking. And that takes up most of the work of braking. You regenerate electricity through turning the motor in reverse. So I'm struggling here. I've got... With the purchase of the Bolt, I have the option of getting a $1,500 credit to install an electrical charger. And I can take a $700 card for Flow Charging Network here in Canada if I want. But I'm finding, and we're using a free app. We don't have full access to the app, but we have a free app now for 3 months to sort of look how the car is charging. It's charging fine. It takes like an hour and a couple of hours, maybe 4 hours if we really wear down the battery from a day's driving, like a lot of driving, like above average driving. The most driving we would do, let's put it that way, without going on the highway. So that's fine. And that's just a 3.3 kilowatts of the charger I have. So it barely makes sense for me to pay an electrician to, install the charger that came with the vehicle, which does up to 7.5 kilowatts. The car will take 11 on AC charging at home. And the level 1 is interesting because that's what I'm doing with the Leaf now. I've got just 100 normal outlet, the 110 volts here in North America. And, it's fine. It's the only time I missed it when I first got it and didn't have that outlet, that high powered outlet, was when I ran out of juice because I was using the heater in the winter. Well, I don't have a heater now, but anyway, I would charge up, I want to charge up real quickly and get some more mileage. Well, now I can still do that because my wife won't be here when that happens. It'll be the middle of the day, and I can just share that charger. And so level 1 will probably work out fine. I think what I'll do when it's really cold is I'll charge to 100%. And then when if the heater did work, I could charge to 100%, and then it would use up some of that range heating up in the morning because it would use more than what the 110 would give it. So yeah, and that would be fine. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. It's a different experience, Brian, going from a car that has like 90, 100 kilometers range to one that has 400 kilometers range, even in the winter times. Like, you don't think about it. It's just not an issue. The range anxiety certainly isn't an issue with a normal EV, and I would consider this a normal EV, wouldn't you?
Yeah. The only time, like I set mine to charge to 90% on the battery unless we're on a road trip, and that's totally fine. And I've been thinking, well, really, especially in the summertime, I should probably set it to 80% or 70% because, you just don't need it.
Right now, I am charging at about 18 kilometers an hour. I think I would be more than that when it was warmer out in the summer. But that's what I got. I used to get 25 in the Leaf, interestingly enough. I think it's maybe more efficient, lighter car, something like that, because the battery's only a fraction of the size. So, and EV myths are rearing its head to my partner. Everyone at work found out she wasn't going to tell people she had an electric car because we live in Hicksville here. Anyway, apparently the van driver at her work, the person who was a hard position to fill, the guy who casually drives their kids around sometimes in a van, he was going on, he hates EVs before this ever happened. He says, they burn, they'll electrocute first responders, and none of that is true. None of that has ever happened. And there's lots of reasons why that is. And I can go into that someday. And, I looked it up and it was like, they're 25 times safer. EVs are 25 times safer than gas or diesel cars. Now, part of that is because the EVs are all newer. They're not that old. So they have the new safety features in them, which is great. That's one reason why I like having a new car, because there's a million safety features in them. And they've already helped me out, getting, dangerous situations. Yeah, and it's just 25 times. And then, younger people drive them too. So that helps. It's not the geriatrics who are driving around blind like my uncle did the other day with his cataracts. He made it back alive. He did a highway trip, but anyway, good for him. He's 80, I want to say 84. My son points out that gas cars will cost more to insure soon, because I was telling him about this argument that was going on at my wife's work. And he, who often doesn't speak about these things, he says it's going to be like motorcycles. They're going to, what motorcycles are here, you pay for the risk.
Well, yeah, if the car is safer, then insurance will be cheaper. I mean, a lot of the cost of insurance, though, is like, dented fenders and scratched paint and stuff. So that's not really going to change that much. Newer cars will eventually have fewer accidents because of the safety features.
Yeah, and there'll be fewer fatalities where, liability insurance is paid out and things like that. I think that's where the big savings is. So I thought that was an interesting point. Anyway, we've got some mail here. It says, "Dear Mr. Stockton and Mr. Whittingham, I want to share a story on a 1981 Chevrolet Impala that was converted to run on ammonia hydrogen." The story is by Gregory Vizina, the CEO of Hydrofuel Inc., which is located in Ontario, Canada, with you. Not necessarily with us, but in the same political boundaries, I suppose.
A couple thousand miles away, but sure.
Anyway, there was a picture in the National Post, and one of the cars they'd featured was right here in Saskatchewan, where we live, and it's almost as crazy as celebrities going to Fargo. But yes, it seems like a very unlikely place and a very unlikely year, but this is how long they've been working on this stuff, Brian. They've been trying to do this, and it's hilarious because it says, in a few years, this is going to be the thing.
Meaning 1981.
Yes.
A few years from then.
A few years from 1981, hydrogen vehicles are going to be, and even now, if you said it, you would say, okay, thank you, Mr. Toyota.
Oh, yeah. In a few years.
This is the person who declares himself autistic, and he says, "Please keep me anonymous for this message." Understandable, Brian, because we're very much a clandestine organization now. We deal only in secrecy as we work for the elites. So I don't intend to join your organization, but I support the environment. Listen, buddy, we don't have an organization to join per se.
Per se.
Just because we have a donate button in the show notes doesn't mean you're going to be in a cult if you do anything. There's nothing to join. We're not Scientologists.
No, but please click on that link and send us a donation if you like.
Or buy a t-shirt. He says, "In fact, I just discovered you." Watch this weird, because I think we've heard from him before. Maybe he's got a short memory. "You can mention this information in your podcast while keeping me anonymous. Have a nice weekend, gentlemen." Oh, sir, we are no gentlemen. I should point that out. But thank you, Mr. Biden. Oh,
oops.
I outed him.
Oh,
damn it. We'll have to edit that out. I hardly think you're that young either, by the way. Oh, I've got a clip here.
A Toronto scientist says he could revolutionize development of the Alberta tar sands. A Saskatchewan promoter says he could revolutionize the family car. They both want to do it with hydrogen. And as Terry Malevsky explains in tonight's special report, they're the latest ideas in an explosion of research into the fuel of the future.
It runs the space shuttle as an exotic fuel. It's available everywhere as water. You just run electricity through water and you get oxygen and hydrogen, the fuel of the future. As cheap gasoline runs out, clean, abundant hydrogen is supposed to take over and run everything.
Within 5 years, assuming the government attitude towards the technology was proper, it would be available to the consumers.
How much does it cost you to run this car?
On a cost per mile basis, it costs you $1.80 a gallon equivalent. So for $1.80, you get enough ammonia to go as far as you would on a gallon of gasoline.
Well, that doesn't sound particularly cheap for 1982.
No. And I don't think it's accurate either. By the way, that was 41 years ago.
Yeah, that's the year I graduated from high school.
It's the year I was in preschool. I'm kidding. I was in high school as well, I think. That's a long time ago. You know, news anchors smoked back then, Brian. It was a different time. You could tell he had a very, very deep voice.
It really sounded like that could have been from the 1950s.
Sure, it did, didn't it?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, right? People have been saying hydrogen is just around the corner, and they've been saying it since apparently 1981 and 82. So we're still no closer. I mean, it's a bit like fusion, I guess, right? Cold fusion is still a few years away.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of stuff like this. There's always news reports or articles, you know, this is the next big thing. And you really have to be discerning about this stuff, you know? And also, do we need the next big thing when the planet is burning and we have so much stuff to take care of? Anyway, thank you for the letter, Anonymous. Everyone listening, write us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We always love to hear from you. There are other ways to contact us as well in the show notes. So if you want to look at the show notes, there we have various different things, and you can send threats to Brian on Twitter if you like or anything. There's all kinds of options if you want to get a hold of us, Brian.
Okay, so this next story here, U.S. and Japan, this is on Electrek. U.S. and Japan make a trade deal for battery minerals ahead of the IRS decision. So with the Inflation Reduction Act that passed recently in the United States, a lot of other countries were kind of upset about it because it came on kind of suddenly. It could be regarded as sort of a protectionist move by the United States to basically keep all the money and all the spending in the United States when it comes to the transition to, you know, electric vehicles. So various countries have been kind of making noise about this, but Japan seems to be the first one to actually strike a deal to improve this situation. So it's a trade deal for battery minerals, according to Reuters. The deal could potentially allow Japanese electric cars greater access to the U.S. EV tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act. So one of the aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act is countries that have a free trade agreement with the U.S. can access some of these benefits. So apparently Japan was not on that list. So they went ahead and negotiated a specific deal for certain battery minerals. The sudden implementation rankled the international community. This is the Inflation Reduction Act as a protectionist move. So by signing this narrow free trade agreement with the U.S. solely for battery critical minerals, the Japanese government gets a little bit closer to being able to work more properly with the U.S. So apparently the EU and other countries are now kind of doing similar things, but Japan, interestingly, because as we keep complaining, they're laggards in switching to electric vehicles, but at least now I guess they have some of the infrastructure in place that will help them do that.
Let's hope so. I mean, that's being overly optimistic, I think, but as we record this show, our Canadian government is about to present the budget, the annual federal budget, and they're struggling to keep up with the Inflation Reduction Act, even though we're in the same jurisdiction, because we're worried, and we've talked about this on the show before, that it is such a big act that all clean investment is going to be sucked out of Canada. Everyone's going to go there. If you got a wind turbine, if you got a battery, if you got technology, if you're a worker, everything's going to go there, and all the investment's going to go there. because it's guaranteed for 10 years.
No, it's the largest climate bill, as we've said before, that's ever been passed. This is just an enormous amount of money. This is just a massive, massive effort. But here in Canada, we're always, ruled in many ways by what happens in the U.S. The U.S. sets the tone, particularly for Canada, but for, other countries around the world, they set the tone in terms of spending. And, this has really set the tone for a more rapid transition to EVs, and governments around the world are having to react.
So maybe they can work out some deals with other people too who are upset about this. I mean, Europe was very nervous about this and making the first noise about this when it first came out.
Yeah. And I think the EU, some kind of deal, I believe, is in the works, but we'll keep an eye on that.
This is the Clean Energy Show with Brian Stockton and James Whittingham.
A new coal-fired plant unit is operating at Zimbabwe's largest thermal power plant. Why would I talk about that, you ask? Thank you for asking, by the way. Yes. I appreciate that. The first of two 300-megawatt units are being built as part of an expansion of a coal-fired generating station in Zimbabwe. And it has come online now. The Zimbabwe Power Corp said the unit began sending electricity now. Power will be progressively fed into the grid until it reaches 300 megawatts. And it is expanding the 900-megawatt Harangi thermal power station as part of a $1.4 billion upgrade to a coal power plant. $1.4 billion for a coal power plant.
I wouldn't call it an upgrade, but sure, okay.
The station is the largest thermal power plant in Zimbabwe, 220 megawatt units commissioned way back when that video news item was playing, way back in the early 80s. So the plant has been plagued by frequent outages. There's been a lot of nuclear outages this year for a lot of different reasons. And people say that, renewables are intermittent. Well, even coal sometimes goes offline.
Yeah. Coal and nuclear are often promoted as really good baseline power. And, that point is debatable.
There's been a lot of mechanical issues, which prompted the expansion and the plan to add new units. And who's behind it is the Chinese company. Chinese companies are notorious now these days for investing in coal. In spite of what's going on in their own borders, they're investing in African coal, which is bad. Obviously. The official said 85% of the funding for the project is back from China, and the expansion was first proposed back in 2015. Now, I've got a heat map here of the solar potential for southern Africa, and I've got a little arrow that points to Zimbabwe on it. And Zimbabwe is one of the best places in Africa. The south west tip of Africa is the best, but this is way better than the bulk of the whole continent. Zimbabwe.
Yeah, the best for solar power, much like our part of the world, tons of sunshine.
$1.4 billion to add a 1 gigawatt plant. For that money, you could easily do the same with solar plus storage, and the fuel is free. You don't have to buy the coal. You don't have to do maintenance. I mean, if you do maintenance on a solar plant, it's like you take a few panels offline. The whole thing keeps going, There's lots of different inverters. Only a tiny fraction of whatever would go down, unless it was bombed with a terrible bomb or something. I mean, the solar is going to keep going, or is a transmission issue. But it's just all this money is, you could have spent it on free sunshine, which is free unless the sun starts sending us invoices, which I don't think is going to happen. Little maintenance costs too. Reuters this last December wrote, Zimbabwe has proposed initiatives. This is kind of sort of talking about solar now, which they are doing. Zimbabwe has proposed initiatives to accelerate 1,000 megawatts of privately owned solar energy projects, also worth about $1 billion, as the country scrambles to plug into an electricity deficit that threatens to compound its economic woes. The country is currently experiencing up to 18 hours of power outages daily. You know what that does to your economy, Brian? Do you have any idea?
That's a lot.
It punches it and kicks it in the gut. It kills it. It takes the air right out of it. And that's not what you want. So if you've got billions of dollars to spend, don't burn it on coal. Put it on solar and wind. You've got all this solar and some battery storage would be great. The country's aging coal plants are prone to frequent breakdowns impacting mines. Mines have to come to a stop. Industry has to come to a stop, and of course, households. So throwing the money away is stupid if you don't go with the renewables, obviously.
Yeah, let's hope that situation improves. So here is the EU story we were talking about. The 2035 combustion car ban is finally going ahead. So this is something we've been talking about for a while. So starting in 2035, you will not be able to sell any new combustion vehicles in Europe. But the hang-up was Germany. They were starting to get cold feet about this, and they wanted a little bit more flexibility, and it was for what are often referred to as e-fuels. So Germany was arguing, well, what about if we have a combustion fuel that is carbon neutral, technically carbon neutral? Shouldn't we be able to burn that? And because the EU wanted to get this passed, they agreed. So if, for instance, you have, say, carbon capture from the air, if you capture carbon from the air and turn that into a fuel and burn it, it's technically carbon neutral because you've taken the same amount out of the air and put it back into the air.
But wouldn't it be nice just to take it out of the air and use electricity made from sun?
And not burn it, which would be the ideal thing. So, but I think, by 2035, electric vehicles are going to be so pervasive that this is probably not going to matter. I don't think anybody's going to want to do that in 2035.
I mean, we're almost there now where we live, for God's sake. We're getting very close. And Europe's ahead of us. God, I love my new car. It's awesome. It's just bloody awesome. And it's just a hatchback. But by God, what a great car, because it's electric. And all the great things that come from being an electric. The fact that you can start it without starting it, heat it without starting it. And just the smooth, quiet ride, the low center of gravity.
And you can preheat it with the key fob, right? Like you just
preheat it with the key fob, or right now our free app, which is $15 a month usually. I'm thinking it's not worth it. Although I was once in the middle of a Costco and I started it with the app, so that was handy. Yeah. I don't know. It's probably not worth it to me, but this made a lot of people mad. This thing,
Yeah, but like I say, I think the point will be moot by 2035. I mean, this is annoying that this has slowed down the legislation, but I think by 2035, no one's going to care, and it's not actually going to impact anything.
Germany, I'm not impressed. You suck. You could do better. Anyway, it's time for the tweet of the week. Thank you. This comes from Michael S. Taylor. I'm pretty sure someone else on here has done this, but just a reminder, the idea of solar and wind can't scale to the same rate as nuclear stopped being true in 2012. And he posts a graph. The graph is a time series index to the first year of more than 30 terawatts hours of electricity generation from nuclear, which was in 1966. And that happened for solar in 2000. Now, if you look at the graph, solar is on the maddening, crazy part of a S-curve. It's almost going straight up, like an F-18 in an air show, Brian, virtually straight up in the air, whereas nuclear is leveled off. And the nuclear proponents say, well, if we can just do what we did in the 60s and 70s, if we could just bring that back, we would have we would be able to catch up and get the power solved. Well, you cannot win.
We want to bring back 3 Mile Island?
Sure, bring back 3 Mile Island. So this is from the information is from BP Statistical Review, and the Twitter handle is mtaylor_NZ for New Zealand, or Z if you're in the United States. So it's an interesting graph to look at, and it makes a very good point, and it is based on real numbers, Brian.
Okay, a story here from Bloomberg about carbon credits. So faulty credits tarnish billion-dollar carbon offset seller. So South Pole, this is a company that sells carbon offsets. It's the world's leading purveyor of carbon offsets, is facing allegations that it exaggerated climate claims around its forest protection projects. So this is something I've been curious about and I've tried to learn more about. Carbon credits are a thing that particularly companies can buy to offset their carbon emissions. Most smart thinking companies around the world are trying to lower their carbon emissions, but that can be difficult. So companies like South Pole have popped up to, help offer that, sort of service. I just want to highlight here a section from the article that kind of explains the beginning of carbon credits for this company, South Pole, because I thought that this was interesting. So one of the founders of the company thought, okay, this is bullshit when he first heard about carbon offsets. The idea being that you're paying one party to cut emissions and letting somebody else off the hook for their emissions. But this guy who founded the company, he found himself in a personal dilemma. He was flying to a conference in Costa Rica, a trip which he calculated would make him responsible for a few tons of CO2 emissions. So instead of foregoing the trip, he organized an effort to swap solar panels for diesel burners at the event's location, an improvement designed to make up for the emissions generated by him flying to this conference. So conference attendees paid $25 per ton of emissions, allowing them to raise a few $1,000s and put in these solar panels that replace the sort of diesel generators. So that's the foundation of a carbon offset, and that really makes a lot of sense. But I think where you get into trouble is that you have so many companies, particularly airlines, that are really desperate to offset their emissions. And I think that, imagine you're a company that sells carbon offsets and, Delta Airlines comes to you and says, yeah, we'd like $100 million worth of those carbon offsets. And, you as a company, what are you going to say? Of course, you're going to say yes. Like, how do you turn down, $10 million or $100 million or whatever? I mean, there's all these companies. So I don't think that the intentions of the company were bad to begin with, but, then it becomes a matter of really verifying how these things are working. And, like protecting forests is one of the things that they do. So if you can kind of prove that this forest was going to be chopped down and then you use your money to save that forest, then that seems like a fairly legitimate carbon offset. But like I say, it's, this company, South Pole, they eventually became worth $1 billion market cap. Like it's $1 billion company. And of course, like if all of these companies are coming to you and offering, millions of dollars, it's going to be hard to turn it down, regardless of, and maybe you just can't scale it up fast enough. Maybe you can't plant enough trees fast enough. How you verify that these carbon offsets are actually doing something that is helping is a little bit difficult. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting and went a kind of a long way to explaining what the current issue is with carbon offsets.
And by the way, this podcast is solar powered. It's Brian and I both have rooftop solar, and the sun is shining brightly.
Ford has been teasing this for a while, and it's finally out. Ford is splitting up their business into 3 different divisions because they want to be more transparent about what the electric vehicle program is costing them. So, they're going to split into 3 divisions, like the Pro division, the normal consumer division, and then the electric division. And they're the first of the legacy car companies to do this. I think the others are going to follow suit and do this as well. Basically, once you break out the numbers and you separate the electric car division of Ford, they lost $2.1 billion in 2022, and they expect to lose $3 billion in 2023. Which sounds really bad, but the Ford stock actually did not drop. The market actually liked this news. Yeah,
Why?
Because I think it shows that it's like rip the Band-Aid off now. It shows that they're actually working on this and it shows a path forward. So yes, they're going to lose $3 billion this year on electric vehicles, but they unveiled a plan where they're going to hopefully turn a profit, 5 or 6 years from now. That's the roadmap that they have. So, but we've all been kind of wondering, okay, well, how are all these legacy car companies doing? So basically with these figures, it means that Ford has been losing about $22,000 on every electric vehicle that they sell, which sounds insane. And of course, it makes you realize, okay, well, maybe that's why they're not so anxious about selling more of these, because they're still making profits on the gasoline vehicles, Ford and the
but
other
they are
car companies.
I think, weren't they number 2 in North America last year behind Tesla?
Yeah, Ford is doing well in North America with electric vehicles in terms of sales. But there's a YouTube channel, Farzad Masbahi. I thought he did a really good analysis of this. He took the Tesla numbers from a similar period in Tesla's history. So right now, Ford is they sold something like 100,000 EVs last year. I think that was the number, 100,000. So he looked back into Tesla's history, and when Tesla was selling around 100,000 vehicles in a year, they were losing $17,000 per car.
Oh, yeah.
So then Ford's number of losing 22 doesn't sound quite so bad. The question is, can they turn it around in 5 or 6 years and scale up like Tesla has scaled up and, eventually turn this into a profit? But it shows that it's just not an easy thing to switch from combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. You are going to lose billions and billions of dollars no matter how good you are at it. The question is, can they pull it off? And then once the profits from the gas cars start to drop, because right now they're still making decent money on their gas cars, and that can even out the losses. But, there's going to be a crossing point where they're selling more EVs, but maybe still losing money on them. And then, starting to maybe lose money on the gas cars as well. So it's going to be a delicate balancing act. But like I say, the stock market seemed to like what Ford did. It stayed basically steady. It's just a matter, can they pull it off?
Well, I think that it's kind of bad news in a way, because now you have to wait for them to make a profit before they lower prices. So we won't be seeing prices go down.
Yeah, they have lowered them a little bit in terms of, because Tesla did, in order to compete. I think they felt like they had to.
Well, that might be the big advantage of having Tesla in the world right now is it got the companies going, but now it needs to keep them competitive, right? Because Tesla's way ahead, and they're at that place now where they're making gobs of money per car, even when they cut prices. And it's time for the lightning round!
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Pedestrian fatalities, Brian, are falling in countries around the world. In the United States, they're rising, however. I've got a graph here for you to visually look at and be shocked about. You see the graph of pedestrian fatalities has been going way up for 20 years. Why? SUVs and trucks. Our propensity to buy SUVs and trucks here in North America, and we're the only place in the world where pedestrian fatalities are going up.
Yeah, and is that because visibility is worse on those? They're heavier, they're meaner? Heavier and meaner, and visibility is terrible. I saw a YouTube video where they placed a bunch of sitting children in front of a pickup truck. They got like 17 in front of them before you could see one. That's horrible. I mean, backup cameras and pedestrian alerts hopefully will help that and the technology will start bringing that down again, because it's a scary notion to lose your child that way. Burger King reveals plans for a 100% electric vehicle fleet by 2030, has transitioned nearly 1/3 of its field team fleet in North America to electric vehicles across 16 states. It's field fleet team. It's field team. They've got people who go around and make sure the burgers are good at different places. I guess so. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that sounds like a great job.
Sure, if you can eat burgers all day and not die. But by 2030, Burger King aims to have an entire zero-emission EV North American fleet. Now, okay, here, the field team lives in various states, traveling to franchise locations to work closely with management and BK staff. But still, Brian, it doesn't sound like a whole lot. It's not like it's a bus company. It's not like it's a courier. It's Burger King.
No, and you could maybe argue that this is maybe even greenwashing because they just want to be thought of as a clean company, but it's good that they're doing something.
But they are traveling 1,500 miles, and they are starting to put a few chargers up, apparently, which is just, it's a no-brainer.
But since electric vehicles are better and cheaper in the long run, of course they're going to do this.
Ooh, it's time for a CES Fast Fact. Yes, from Bloomberg. 1 in 5 solar panels installed worldwide last year was mounted on a Chinese roof. There's a fact for you, Brian. Just put that in your pocket and carry it around with you.
That is way more than I would have suspected. We know that China's doing a lot in terms of green energy, but the fact that a quarter of it is rooftop solar, a fifth of it is rooftop solar, that's pretty amazing.
In one country, which is, it's a big country. In one country. But if you said they were 1/5 of all solar panels in the world were installed in China, I believe you, but on their roofs, that's quite something,
just
actually.
On the roof.
From the Charlotte Observer in North Carolina, a majority of North Carolina's House Transportation Committee has approved a bill that, if passed into law, would impose a $100 fine on combustion engine dickheads and trucks parking in EV spots, EV charging spots. So the people, they call it icing if you're new to the EV world. They use an internal combustion engine ICE vehicle to prevent you from charging.
$100 fine would be great. And if there's a sign posted that says $100 fine for gas cars parking here, I think that would be an amazing deterrent.
And maybe a 10-year jail term as well would be appropriate, I think, or capital punishment.
Sure.
You should just be, in the United States where everyone has a gun, you should just be able to take pot shots at anyone who parks them. They probably do anyway. Purelator, the Canadian courier company, has announced the largest network investment in its history, $1 billion Canadian. Is going into the purchase of different things for green investments, including 3,500 electric delivery vehicles and an electrification of 60 courier terminals to electrify its Canadian fleet by 2030. Swedish heat pump maker Cuvantum has debuted an award-winning apartment heat pump that is so compact it can fit under a kitchen sink. More on that on another show, perhaps. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Sweden generated a record 27% of electricity from wind in February. It has increased capacity, Brian, greatly in the last few years, and it's paying off. Last year, Sweden installed the second most wind capacity in the EU, 2.4 gigawatts behind Germany, who was the leader. In 2018, Sweden's wind capacity has doubled since that date. 5 years ago. So that's pretty impressive. And finally on the show this week from Electrek, the U.S. manufactures, if the U.S. manufactures the solar panels it uses instead of importing them, then that would speed up decarbonization according to research published in Nature Communications by Cornell Engineering. Specifically, fully returning solar panel manufacturing to the United States by 2035 would cut emissions by 30% and reduce energy consumption by 13% compared to 2020, when the U.S. relied almost entirely on imports.
Yeah, a lot of things have to ramp up, like heat pump production, but also solar panel production. We need more of everything, and more locally is better.
And that is our time for this week. That's our show. That's all we have. We've gone longer than we probably planned on. So that's okay. We like spending time with you. We like to hear from you. If you have something to say to us, questions, comments, please, right now, jot it down in an email. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, even if you don't go there, for God's sake, subscribe. It helps us out. We've got all kinds of special stuff up there, including a video podcast. And check out the Clean Energy Store. If you liked our merch, link is in your show notes, and show your clean energy pride every day. If you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your podcast app so that you get our episodes delivered to you every week, because that's what we do, Brian. We're here every week, and I'll see you next time.
See you next week.